Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
I'd like to demonstrate for you a method of model trimming. If you follow this procedure carefully, your models will be neatly and efficiently trimmed. Before we begin, there are a few words that we'll be using that I'd like to acquaint you with for clarity. The capital is the upper portion of the maxillary cast. The base is the lower portion, the part that's resting flat on the table. The art portion is the non-anatomical portion of both the upper and lower casts. The heel is the portion between the side and the back of each cast. The side area is the flattened area on the side of each cast, and the arc is the circular area on the lower cast. Before we begin, I'd like to show you a set of properly trimmed models so that you can see what we're trying to achieve. The capital and base are parallel to the floor. The total height is 2 1/4 to 2 3/4 inches. When in occlusion, the backs of the upper and lower casts are in the same plane. The art portion of each cast is symmetrical, thus reflecting any asymmetry in the occlusion. The periphery of each cast is approximately equidistant from the facial surfaces of the teeth, and it is trimmed to the depth of the vestibule. All vertical line angles are parallel and perpendicular to the base. The heels are from 3/8 to 5/8 of an inch wide. They are equal from right to left, but not necessarily equal from upper to lower cast. Here are a few hints for you to remember when trimming your models. In all steps, do not trim the model completely. Leave some room for adjustment and for polishing. The only place where the maxillary and mandibular casts relate to each other is on their backs. A good impression and careful pour will make your trimming much easier. If you've allowed the impression to sink into your plaster or not seated it evenly, you will spend much more time than necessary at the model trimming. Start with an adequately poured cast that is sharp and smooth and thick enough for total height. Small bubbles can be removed with a number 7 spatula prior to trimming. If you soak the casts in water for 5 to 15 minutes, they will be easier to trim. However, make sure that you don't place them under running water or soak them for a prolonged period of time. This will cause a great deal of surface roughness. Now we'll move to the model trimmer, and I'll show you how to actually trim your models. Before you begin any trimming, make sure that the table of your model trimmer is perpendicular to your cutting blade. When trimming, you should begin with the upper cast. You may have to trim down the sides a little bit so that it can fit inside the model trimmer. The first cut that you make on your cast is the most important one. And this is the cut where you trim the capital. You should trim it so that the plane is from 0 to 5 degrees to the occlusal plane. compensate for the curve of speed. After your capital is trimmed, you should establish the midline. You can mark it with a pencil and follow right along the midline suture. Don't use the space between the two centrals as a reference point for your midline, because this very often may be off-center. Now you will trim the back of your cast so that it is perpendicular to your midline. If you keep the capital flat on the table of the model trimmer, the back will be 90 degrees to your capital. Make sure in doing this step that you don't trim in too far. When the back is trimmed, you can then trim the sides. I prepared a cast here to show you what we're aiming for in the sides. You want your cut to be parallel to an imaginary line drawn from the cusp through the central fauces of your posterior teeth. The opposite side should be even with your initial cut. You use an angle former to check these measurements. It will make it a lot easier for you to get these areas even. If you don't have an angle former, you can get the sides even by transferring the midline onto the surface of your capital. Draw two parallel lines perpendicular to your midline. Measure equal distances along the parallel lines to the opposite side and draw a line through these distances. Now you can cut away your capital until it is even with this line. With a little more experience, you can cut these sides by just using eye judgment. After your sides are trimmed, you'll trim the front portion of the model. You should trim from an imaginary line opposite the center of your cuspid to the midline on the most normal side of the cast. After you have your fronts trimmed, you may trim the heels. The heel should be perpendicular to a line drawn bisecting the angle opposite the heel. A good way to get these heels centered is to place your thumbs right on the angle opposite your cuspid. Now we've completed trimming the upper. It's symmetrical with all angles equal, and the back is perpendicular to your capital surface. To trim the lower cast, you should relate the upper and lower cast together. A wax bite is very helpful in doing this. The first cut on the mandibular cast is to make the back surface parallel and on the same plane to the back surface of the maxillary cast. The easiest way to do this is place the capital flat on the table of your model trimmer. Place the teeth in occlusion and trim until the backs are even. You can check this by setting your models in occlusion on their backs. After you have the backs trimmed evenly, you should trim the base of your model. Set the back of the mandibular cast flat on the table of the model trimmer. And trim the base. Make sure that you keep the back of the model flat on the table, and this will ensure that your cut on the base will be perpendicular to the back. The next step is to trim the sides. You will do this in the same manner as you trim the sides of the maxillary cast. You'll notice that I've trimmed down a little bit the sides of the cast so that it would fit in the model trimmer. I have a pre-trimmed cast here to show you how the completed trim of the sides should look. After the sides are trimmed, you should trim the arc. The arc should be a concentric circle, a semicircle concentric to a circle that would be drawn through the facial surfaces of your anterior teeth. After the arc is trimmed, you should trim the heels. Unlike the maxillary cast, the mandibular heels should be trimmed so that they are parallel to the opposite side. When the mandibular cast is trimmed down, you should relate it to the maxillary cast. Resting the cast on the back. If the backs are not perfectly equal, you may have to trim a little bit more to even them up. Now that our models are all trimmed, I'd like to say a few words about finishing the models. While they're still wet, fill in any voids with a mixture of plaster about the thickness of heavy cream. When the plaster is fully set, smooth all the flat surfaces using a large Arkansas stone or sandpaper. When using the sandpaper, make sure that you place it flat on the table and rub the flat surfaces of your model along the sandpaper. This will help ensure that you keep your angle sharp. You can use a number 7 spatula to remove any imperfections as bubbles along the gingival borders. The tongue space should be cleaned out using a rotating stone or a lab knife. Allow your models to dry for 1 to 2 days, and then label the models with a sharp pencil. You should print in capital letters 1/8 of an inch tall. On the first line, put your patient's name, and on the second line, the age in years and months, and the date that the impressions were taken. On the lower model, just put the patient's name. After your models are labeled, you may soak them in any one of the variety of soap solutions that are available commercially. One of the most important aspects of completed models is that when they're placed on their backs on the table, they will fit together in proper occlusion.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.